Hello, World Geography students. This is Mr. Everton, and this is a video to help you review for your Term 1 test. And because the Term 1 test is on North America and Africa, today I'm going to be trying to help you come up with comparisons between North America and Africa. So one of the major points of comparison we're going to talk about is economics, and that's why your sheet has a lot more room for economics than anything else. And you can see here what we've talked about 1,001 times, a choropleth map showing gross domestic product around the world, gross domestic product per capita. Remember, GDP is all the money that a country makes in 1 year, and GDP per capita is all the money that a country makes in 1 year divided by the number of people. And you can see when you look at this map that the United States and Canada are very wealthy, and when you look at Africa, you can see all that dark pink and light pink means that Africa is not very wealthy. And so much of this unit was about talking about how it got to be like that. So the United States and Canada, we're going to talk about their economics first. They both have access to many natural resources, fertile land, good supplies of water, timber, minerals in the ground that they can mine, oil and gas. And these all lead to what we call primary sector jobs, which are jobs where people make money by processing natural resources. And then they send those resources to factories in the secondary sector to turn them into things. And those things are bought by consumers. We call this consumption. In the United States and Canada, there's a lot of consumption. People have, decent amount of money, and so they buy lots and lots of stuff, like at this mall here. And there are a lot of what we call tertiary sector jobs. And a tertiary sector job is a service job. It can be anything all the way from being like a low-paying job like a waiter to a high-paying job like a doctor. It's anybody who helps other people to make their money. And most people in the United States and Canada live in cities or urban areas like New York City, which you see pictured here. And then another thing we talked about was that the United States used to have a stronger secondary sector. We used to have lots of factories that would do manufacturing in the Rust Belt, which is, upstate New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. And over time, those factories have closed down and people have left the Rust Belt and they've moved south and west to what we call the Sun Belt. So states like California, Arizona, New Mexico, Georgia, Florida. And there are more tertiary jobs available. So people are losing the jobs in the secondary sector in the Rust Belt and moving to the Sun Belt where the jobs are. When we talk about Africa's economy, we are also talking about natural resources, and they have lots of them. Lots of mineral wealth like diamonds and gold, lots of oil, lots of timber and rubber, and all kinds of things are available in Africa. But Africa's role traditionally has been as a supplier of natural resources. The natural resources leave Africa and they get paid for selling them, but they don't have any way to process them. And the number one job in Africa is agricultural. There's subsistence agriculture, like the woman in Kenya on the top, who is growing crops to feed people, feed herself, feed her family, and her community. And then there's plantation agriculture, like this man below with the cocoa pods, who a plantation is a place where farming is done to grow a cash crop, which is then sold in order to make money. The reason why Africa's economy is set up like this is because of colonization. Remember, colonization was a period in the 1800s and 1900s where European countries took over Africa and started taking the natural resources and shipping them back to Europe. You can see here that these railroads were built leading out to the coast so that natural resources could be sent out to ports where they would be shipped to Europe. And that's why Africa has a very small or no secondary sector. All the factories were built in Europe, and so Africa has just continued in the pattern that was established during colonization. I'm going to switch over and talk about the natural world now, human-environment interaction. When we talked about the United States, we talked about the Colorado River and how it's providing water to a large part of the Northwest where people are moving, right? Because of the Sun Belt, and people are moving there to get those jobs, and they're using the water of the Colorado River. There's not enough water in the river for all the people who are moving there, and thus the Colorado River is starting to dry out. So that's one example of an environmental problem. We talked about the problems of businesses harvesting non-renewable resources that run out and then leave a city with no economy left. We talked about the ways that businesses damage the environment sometimes in their own economic interest. And we talked about how governments try to regulate businesses, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. When we talked about the natural world in Africa, one of the main things we talked about was desertification. The Sahara Desert is the largest desert in the world. It's across the northern part of Africa, and it keeps expanding into a region called the Sahel. The Sahel is a semi-arid or partially dry area where there is farming that happens, where particularly there's animals that are able to graze, like sheep and goats are able to eat the grass. But the desert, whenever there's a drought, the desert spreads a little bit further south and turns a little more of the Sahara into a desert. And that's creating real problems for the countries in the Sahel who are having a harder and harder time getting the food that they need to survive. Briefly, I want to talk about society. The United States and Canada are both very diverse, which means there's many different kinds of people who live there. And in the United States and Canada, that's because of immigration. That's because people came to North America from other places and settled here. And a large part of that was colonization, where Europeans took land away from Native Americans and claimed it for themselves. And another large part of that is enslaved labor, where Europeans enslaved Africans and brought them to North America to work for free. This has led to many diverse areas, particularly in cities, diverse urban areas where immigrants frequently settled in the early 1900s. And this history of immigration has led to ethnic neighborhoods like the Chinatown you see pictured here. Finally, African society is also very diverse. Africa contains hundreds of different ethnic groups, all with their own languages, all with their own culture, religion, traditions, history. And then those ethnic groups were sort of artificially put into countries by Europeans. When Europeans colonized Africa, so here's a map of all the different ethnic groups. You can see it's quite a lot of them. And here is a map of modern boundaries drawn by Europeans during colonization. You can see that there's a huge amount of different people who have their own ethnic identity living amongst each other. And it doesn't always create conflict, but sometimes it does. And we talked about the conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda, and there's conflict in the Congo and Sudan and many other places. So sometimes this grouping of ethnic groups can create conflict in Africa, just as sometimes ethnic groups can come into conflict in North America as well. It's not something that we focused on, but I think we all know that it's definitely a thing. So to summarize, for your test, you need to make sure that you know about the sectors of the economy, the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. You definitely need to know about colonization and its effects. You need to know about environmental challenges that are faced in Africa and in North America. And you need to know about different diverse cultures and how these places have come to have such diverse cultures. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you do well in your test.